So this week in the Sacred Gathering, we get to look at kind of a strange little psalm. This is Psalm 82. I think it's one in which the setting and what exactly is going on in the psalm can be a little vague at times, and yet the core message seems to be one that resonates through many places in the Bible, telling us something just really important about what God values. So let me start out by reading this odd little psalm. All right. God takes his stand in the divine assembly. In the midst of gods, he renders judgment. How long will you judge dishonestly and show favor to the wicked? Do justice to the poor and the orphan. Vindicate the lowly and the wretched. Free the poor and the needy. From the hand of the wicked, save them. They don't know, they don't grasp. In darkness they walk about. All the earth's foundations totter. As for me, I had thought you were all gods, and the sons of the Most High were you all. Yet indeed, like humans you shall die, and like one of the princes fall. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you hold in estate all the nations. So the strange picture that is being used here is one which would have been very familiar to people in the ancient world, but one which I would say people, even in the kind of late ancient world through the modern world, have been sort of uncomfortable with. And that was, remember the context is one of kind of a polytheistic, they believe in lots of little gods that are tied to different kind of ethnic regions, that are tied to geography. Maybe there's like a god of a certain place or a god of trees, etc., right? They think there are lots of little g gods for everything. And the image was one in which this was used in different cultures and different, many different kind of mythologies around the world, in which all these gods are gathered into kind of an assembly, the same way like an emperor gathers the smaller kings or the governors or whatever into kind of this council to run things. I guess sort of like an American Senate, right? In which they're kind of vying to get their ideas across, in which they're trying to all argue back and forth, etc. And so over time, this image that is being used has been kind of disputed of how literally we're supposed to describe this. What exactly is the psalmist doing with this image? We've got people all the way from one end of the spectrum who say, this idea of this gathering of gods clearly shows that at the time, monotheism, the belief in one God, hadn't firmly settled. They still believed in many gods, and Yahweh, God of the Old Testament, is just the favorite God or whatever. All the way through people saying, no, they clearly don't believe in other gods. These are probably the word that's used here, which does have a really broad kind of semantic range, as many words in Hebrew do. It's clearly talking about like judges or kings or governors, right? So like people in places of authority, etc. And I actually think that just kind of vagueness and the range of what might be included in there can be actually helpful to the way we approach this psalm, right? Because this gathering of people, of these things that seem to be powerful, that are supposed to be exhibiting a certain way, whether we think of them as literal gods that God is standing in judgment, all the way through those in power who embody ideals, etc., down to, I've heard people use this psalm to kind of point out what are the things that we use like gods, right? We don't believe in gods of the rocks and sea, and yet we think of most of the things that people traditionally would have looked to these gods for, being provided for, having enough food to eat, for safety, etc. What are we looking to for those things? Those are things like the systems we're part of, the political parties we vote on, the communities and the cultures that we are members of, right? And so I think it's an interesting psalm because gather any and all versions of those things which are in power and which we may look to for safety or control in the world. Again, all the way from an ancient Near Eastern little g God through maybe a system or an ideology nowadays. And all of those things can be gathered in some way into this picture in which the scene that they are probably thinking of as like a council chamber or a Senate chamber is instead turning into a courtroom in which God, the true God, has a charge to make against all of these different versions of power, whether they're people or ideas or monsters or gods, whatever, right? And this is the charge. How long are you going to judge dishonestly and show favor to the wicked? Do justice to the poor and orphan. Vindicate the lowly and the wretched. Free the poor and the needy from the hand of the wicked. Save them. And so I think one of the important biblical pictures that is being brought up and reminded of, so whether we're thinking about these ancient Near Eastern deities that are at war with each other constantly, right? And clearly the most powerful god is the winner at the time. You win the battle, your god is clearly the best. Everyone should follow that god because they're the winner at the moment. We have that same approach with politics, with our views on way the world should be, right? All those things tend to be like, we're interested in what works. We're interested in what is winning. We're interested in having power so our way of doing things can get across and we can get things done, right? And yet this critique of that idea seems to be across the board that power and resources, the ability to do things, exist not for the sake of pushing your ideas or benefiting your types, but of benefiting those without, who don't have access to power or justice or the same opportunities with the system as well. Again, there's a lot of talk about these days, but we forget just how radical that idea is. We still think we need to grab power. We still think we need to get our things across. We need to organize. We need to whatever, align the world in the correct way so what we believe can be pushed through. So our agenda, so we can be taken care of and safe and comfortable, etc. And this psalm, I think, is challenging that very idea that might makes right, that winner takes all, that power exists for the sake of what? Power exists for the sake of those who don't have access. Power should be exercised, whether it's resources or education or whatever. Those things exist for the sake of the people who don't have access to those, who don't have the ability to navigate the systems, who aren't going to know how to work it, who aren't going to know or even have the resources to engage with that thing that is theirs in the first place. And it's a very I just think it's a very interesting psalm because in many ways we see God putting, his own life into this idea. Whereas the ancient Near Eastern gods, whether it's, ancient Egypt or any of these other places, they go and they conquer. They go and they take stuff from everybody else to benefit themselves. And then we see this God. This is the God who is the most powerful, right? Who created the world, who is much, much stronger than any of these other things. And instead of just bullying his way around, getting what he wants, he goes and he saves a slave people and gives them a home, right? The Exodus. He lives among them as they're wandering around in the desert. We see this through the prophets. We see this with Jesus in the New Testament, right? It's not about Jesus always getting what he wants. It's about him drawing near and in some ways not getting what he wants. God has all the power in the world, and yet he allows us the space and the freedom to screw up. And instead of forcing us to do the things he knows are best for us, God instead draws near and allows us to make those kinds of mistakes. And so it's an interesting psalm because God is willing to do exactly what you said. He's willing to take and use power for the benefit of those who don't have power, who don't have wisdom, who don't have the resources. That's all of us. That's humanity, right? And so it's an interesting one because God, who has all the power, seems to be kind of dispersing his power through all these other things. And in those other verses further down, right, it seems like God is disappointed. I thought you were gods. I thought you were the sons of the Most High. I thought you would value the sorts of things I did. I thought you would be interested in my way of doing things. I thought you would take care of the least the way I seem to be taking care of the least. And God's complaint is, what it says in verse 5, it says, look, and even the earth's foundations are going to totter. This matters. It It's like that stone in the pond. It ripples outward and things get broken when we are not willing to do what God says, when we take any opportunity we have and use it to benefit ourselves rather than other people. It's the whole world is based on kind of that broken principle in some ways. And that is what he's taking to task. Again, whether it's the gods of the ancient world, whether it's our modern political leaders, whether it's those with influence and power, whether it's just those places which we feel like we have control. The critique again and again and again in here is we are breaking the world around us because we're not willing to take care of those who don't have access. And this one, the lowly, the wretched, the poor, the needy, those who need to be rescued, those who need power and strength. And it's interesting. I thought it was fascinating because, again, we're talking about these vast cosmic forces that are so bigger than us. Again, thinking of the whole range of what those could be, these things that are bigger than us, that are more powerful us, that we tend to look to solve those kinds of problems. And yet God's judgment on them is not only are they not doing what he wants them to, they're not functioning, but that they are going to end. That they are limited like all things, that this kind of great equalizer, death, is going to catch up with every king, every god, every ideology, every system, whatever. These things are all ultimately going to fail us unless they are God themselves, right? Unless it is God. He's the only one that is going to come through. People will disappoint us. Every one of these things will disappoint us, except God. The only one who can teach us, to show us what power and strength and resources and education, blah, 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 is actually for, right? The least of those. And I love where this psalm ends. It ends not in this kind of theodicy, abstract, bizarre picture of the assembly of the gods, whatever those are, but in a simple prayer. God's voice, God's image of him standing down, all these other forms of power kind of fades away. And we find a person who is simply doing the only logical response, and that is praying, right? Arise, Lord, judge the earth. For you hold in estate all nations, all things, all forms of power, all ideologies, all leaders, all kings, etc., right? We humbly come and say, Lord, may your way of seeing things be the way it actually is. Your will be done in Jesus' prayer, right? Because you are the God of everything. It's not about these petty little kingdoms. It's not about these warring ideologies or factions or ways of being in the world. We trust you. We trust your judgment, your way of doing things. When everything else we've wanted to trust comes under judgment, we say, arise, do your thing, God. We are here to submit because we need you. So again, a strange psalm, a weird image, but I think it's just a good reminder of where the things we often trust in stand before God, that he's generally disappointed, that they're generally not doing the most basic thing for the same reason we don't want them to, right? We would much rather be taking care of ourselves than trust that power, resources, etc. exist for those without those things. And so we do ask for God to judge the world. We ask for God to make the world as he would have it. And again, hoping for the grace that we too can be caught up into this grand story of what God is up to in the world and seeing things the way God sees them.